a father and a daughter-in-law, struck by the same illness in the same year, behind the same palace walls. One now speaking gently of a personal blessing as his treatment eases. The other standing beside a stranger in a hospital ward, holding her hand as a bell rings out to mark the end of her ordeal. This is not a story of scandal. There are no villains here, and no secrets to chase. It is something rarer on a channel like this. A story about courage. About two people who carried a private fear through very public lives, and did it with a grace that quietly moved a nation. So today, let us set the usual drama aside. Let us speak softly and carefully, and only of what is true. Because some stories are not meant to be told loudly. They are meant to be told well. Welcome back to Richard Valentin. I am Richard, and I am so glad to have your company today. Pour yourself something warm, settle in somewhere comfortable, and let us take our time. This is a tender subject, and it deserves a gentle hand. We are going to follow two journeys that have run side by side. The journey of King Charles, who at 77 has spent 2 years living with cancer, while carrying the full weight of the crown. And the journey of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who faced her own diagnosis in the prime of her life, and who now speaks with remarkable openness about what it means to heal. Let me be clear about how I will tell this, because care matters here more than ever. I will deal only in what has been publicly shared. Neither the king nor the princess has ever disclosed the type of cancer they faced, and I will not guess at it, not for a moment. I will not play doctor. I will not speculate about what lies ahead for either of them, because that is not mine to do, and frankly it would be unkind to try. What I will offer is the documented truth, told with the warmth and respect these two deserve. That, I think, is the only fitting way. Start with the king's own words, because in December he gave us a rare and quietly moving glimpse into his recovery. In a pre-recorded video message, filmed at Clarence House and broadcast in support of a major cancer campaign, Charles spoke directly about his own health. He shared the good news that, thanks to early diagnosis, effective treatment, and what he warmly called following doctor's orders, his schedule of cancer treatment could be reduced in the new year. He described that milestone as both a personal blessing and a testament to how far cancer care has come. There was something disarming about it. Here was a monarch, 77 years old, choosing not to dwell on himself, but to turn the moment outward. He used his own experience to urge others toward the thing he credited with helping him. Screening. Early detection. He spoke with real concern about the millions of people in the country who are not up to date with the checks available to them, and he put it as plainly as anyone could. Early diagnosis, he said, quite simply saves lives. Let me give you the background that frames those words, because the timeline matters. Buckingham Palace first announced the king's diagnosis in February of 2024. It came as a genuine surprise, discovered during a hospital procedure for a benign, non-cancerous prostate condition. The palace was careful from the very start to make one thing clear: the cancer was not prostate cancer. Beyond that, no further detail about the type was ever released, and that privacy has been respected ever since. He began a course of regular treatments, stepped back briefly from public-facing duties, and was even hospitalized for a short time in the spring of that year for observation, owing to some side effects. And then slowly, he came back. Engagement by engagement, he returned to the work he clearly loves. By the time of his December message, the palace was able to share that he had responded, in their words, exceptionally well, and that the king himself was deeply touched by the wave of warmth his candor had inspired. To my eye, that exchange of feeling, a monarch being honest and a public responding with love, was one of the gentler moments of the whole royal year. Think for a moment about how unusual that candor really is, coming from where it does. The royal family has for generations kept its health matters firmly behind closed doors. Monarchs simply did not discuss such things in public. For Charles to sit before a camera and speak openly, however carefully, about living with cancer marks a real departure from how his mother's generation would have handled it. He chose to lend his own vulnerability to a cause, trusting that his honesty might nudge an ordinary viewer toward a checkup that could save their life. That is not a small thing for a man raised in the most private institution in the land. It took a kind of quiet courage that is easy to overlook beneath the formality of a video message. Travel back now, through the longer arc of his journey, because the dignity of it only shows when you see the whole path rather than a single step. Cast your mind to early 2024. A new king, not yet 18 months on the throne, still settling into the role he had waited a lifetime to assume, suddenly handed a diagnosis that would frighten anyone. What strikes me, looking at how he responded, is how little he allowed it to halt him. He kept reading his red boxes, the daily papers of state. He kept meeting his prime ministers. He kept, wherever his health allowed, showing his face to the country. There is a particular kind of courage in carrying on quietly, and he showed it. You could even read his recovery in the small ceremonial details if you knew where to look. At the annual Trooping the Colour, the great summer parade, Charles did not ride on horseback as monarchs traditionally have. For 2 years running, he travelled by carriage alongside Queen Camilla instead. Some saw that simply as a practical choice. The way I see it, it was a quiet, honest signal. A man pacing himself, listening to his body, and refusing to pretend he was anything other than a patient still healing. There is a lesson in that, I think, that reaches well beyond palaces and parades. So many of us, when illness comes, feel a pressure to carry on exactly as before, to prove that nothing has changed, to wave away concern. Charles did something braver. He kept working, yes, but he also let himself be seen adapting. He accepted help. He took the carriage. He allowed the country to watch a king recover at the pace a recovery actually requires, rather than performing a strength he did not yet have. For an institution built so heavily on appearances, that honesty was its own kind of leadership. He showed, simply by being himself, that there is no shame in healing slowly. Now a word of honesty, because warmth should never mean glossing over the truth. The news that treatment can be reduced is genuinely good news, and it deserves to be received as such. But it is not the same as a declaration that the illness is entirely gone. As best the public record shows, the king remains under medical care, and no announcement of a full all-clear has been made. I tell you that not to dim the hope, but because I respect you too much to oversell it. The picture is one of real and steady progress, carried with grace. That is more than enough to be grateful for, without needing to gild it. I think audiences can always feel the difference between a story that respects them and one that flatters them. There is a temptation, with royal health, to reach for either extreme, to catastrophize, hinting darkly at the worst, or to sugar everything over until it loses all meaning. Neither serves you, and neither serves the people the story is about. So I try to walk the honest middle. Good progress, carried with grace, alongside a journey that is not yet finished. Held together, those two truths give you the real shape of where the king stands. Not a tragedy, not a fairy tale ending. Something more valuable than both, which is the truth, told with care. Before we move on, I want to thank those of you who wrote to me after earlier episodes about your own families and this illness. So many of you have walked this road, as patients or as the ones who love them. Your messages remind me why a story like this must be handled softly. It is never only about a famous name, it is about everyone watching who hears an echo of their own life in it. Sit with Catherine's story now, because hers has unfolded along a path that began at almost the same moment and has reached a more settled place. It started, for her, with major abdominal surgery in January of 2024. It was during the aftermath of that operation that cancer was found. In March, in a video message that many of us will never forget for its quiet bravery, the Princess of Wales told the world she had been diagnosed and that she was beginning a course of preventative chemotherapy. Like her father-in-law, she chose not to specify the type of cancer, and that choice has been honoured by all who care for her. What followed was a long and visibly difficult year, lived partly in private and partly under a level of public attention few of us could imagine. In September of 2024, she shared that she had completed her chemotherapy, speaking of her relief while gently warning that the road to full recovery would still be long. And then, in January of 2025, came the words so many had been hoping for. She announced that her cancer was in remission. I find the way she phrased it deeply human. "It is a relief," she said, "to now be in remission," adding that she remained focused on her recovery. And then a line that has stayed with me, and I suspect with many of you. As anyone who has had a cancer diagnosis knows, she reflected, it takes time to adjust to a new normal. A new normal. Not a return to the old life, untouched, but the careful building of a different one. There is more wisdom in that small phrase than in 100 grander statements. I want to linger on that idea of a new normal, because anyone who has been through a serious illness or loved someone who has will recognize it instantly. Recovery is so often imagined as a finish line, a single day when everything returns to how it was. The truth, as Catherine gently named it, is quieter and more complicated. The body carries the memory of what it went through. So does the mind. Healing is less a door slamming shut on the past, and more a slow process of learning to live alongside it. That a woman in her position, watched by millions, would speak so plainly about that reality gave permission to countless others to stop expecting too much of themselves too soon. Sometimes the most useful thing a public figure can say is simply, "This is hard, and that is all right." From there, Catherine did something quietly remarkable. She did not simply step back into royal life and close the door on the experience. She began, instead, to turn toward others living through the same thing. She has gradually taken on more, including this year her first official overseas trip since entering remission, a visit to Italy for her work on early childhood. She has, by every sign, emerged from the hardest chapter of her life, not hardened, but softened, more open, more willing to sit with other people in their fear. That shift in her is, to my mind, the quiet heart of Catherine's story. Illness could so easily have made her retreat further behind the palace walls, and no one would have blamed her if it had. Instead, it seems to have deepened her sense of purpose. The woman who returned is recognizably the same princess, but there is a new steadiness to her, a sense of someone who has stared down something frightening and come out the other side, knowing what she wants her time and her platform to mean. You can see it in where she chooses to go and in how she is when she gets there. Less the polished figurehead, more the real and present human being, willing to hold a stranger's hand on a hard day. Reflect now on the strange and tender parallel between these two journeys, because together they tell a story that neither tells alone. Pause on the sheer weight of the coincidence. Within the space of a few weeks in early 2024, two members of the same family, a reigning king and the future queen, were each told they had cancer. Think of what that meant inside those palace walls. Not headlines, not constitutional questions, just a family like any other, absorbing the same blow twice over, almost at once. For all the gold and ceremony that surrounds them, in that moment they were simply frightened people, loving frightened people. It is one of the great levelers, this illness. It does not check your title at the door. And yet their journeys, though they began together, now sit at different points on the same road. Catherine has reached remission and speaks from a place of recovery, looking back at the storm she has come through. Charles is a little further inside the weather still, his treatment easing but ongoing, his progress real but unfinished. One has rounded a corner. The other is still walking toward it, steadily, with the same quiet resolve. What binds the two journeys, more than anything, is a shared dignity in how they have been carried. Notice that neither of them ever turned their illness into a spectacle, neither disclosed the medical specifics, neither sought pity. Both, instead, used what they chose to share to do some good, pointing others toward screening, toward openness, toward hope. Think of it like two lanterns lit from the same difficult fire. Each could have kept its small light to itself. Instead, both turned outward, to help others find their way through the dark. It is worth saying, too, how rare it is for two such journeys to be visible at once within a single family, and what that has meant for the people watching. For a great many viewers, the royal family functions as a sort of national mirror. We project onto them our own hopes and griefs and ordinary dramas. So when two of its most senior figures were unwell at the same time, something in the country's mood shifted. The usual chatter about who wore what and who stood where fell away for a while. In its place came something more sincere, a widespread, unforced wish for two people simply to get better. I cannot remember the last time the public conversation around the family was quite so free of cynicism. Illness, for all its cruelty, has a way of reminding us what actually matters. That, I think, is why the public has responded to them with such unusual tenderness. We are not, on the whole, a sentimental country about our royals. We tease them as often as we cheer them. But illness, faced honestly, has a way of dissolving the distance. For a while there, the king and the princess were not distant figures on a balcony. They were a father and a daughter-in-law, both unwell, both brave, and the affection that flowed toward them was real. Listen, next, to the family around them, because some of the most touching words in this whole story have come not from the patients, but from the man who loves them both. Prince William has rarely spoken about any of it, and when he has, the restraint has only made his words land harder. Back in 2024, in a candid moment abroad, he described that year as the hardest of his life. He did not reach for diplomacy. He called it brutal. A husband and a son, watching his wife and his father face the same illness in the same months, and being honest about how much it hurt. More recently, in the spring of this year, he offered a softer glimpse. Speaking warmly on a radio program, he said how very proud he was of how far Catherine had come. And then, almost off the cuff, he said something that travelled around the world within hours. His family, he admitted, simply could not cope without her. There was no grand speech in it, just a husband, plainly grateful that the woman at the centre of his world was still there, still well, still herself. What moves me about William in all of this is how ordinary his reactions have been, in the best possible sense. Strip away the titles, and here is a man who spent a year terrified for the two people he loves most, who found that year brutal, and who now cannot quite hide his relief that his wife is well again. There is nothing royal about any of that. It is the most human thing in the world, and perhaps that is part of why his rare comments resonate so widely. We do not relate to a future king. We relate, every one of us, to a husband and a son who was frightened, and who is now, cautiously, allowing himself to breathe again. Then there was Catherine herself, this June, on a solo visit to a leading cancer hospital in Manchester. She stood beside a young mother who had just finished her own treatment, and was there as the woman rang the bell that marks the end of chemotherapy. Catherine spoke, with the authority of someone who truly knows, about how cancer changes you, in her words, physically and emotionally. And she turned to the patient's tearful family and offered them something only a fellow traveller could. She told them she understood how hard it was for loved ones too, recalling how hard it had been for her own children and her parents. "You go through it with them," she said. Not a royal performing sympathy. A survivor, recognizing her own family's pain in theirs. Here is where I will allow myself one gentle piece of speculation, clearly flagged as such because you have trusted me this far. It has been reported that William would be deeply shaken, even devastated, were his father's health to take a difficult turn. I cannot confirm the private feelings of any man, and I would never pretend to. But it does not take a royal insider to imagine it. Any of us who have a parent we love can picture exactly what that fear feels like. By my reading, the strain of these 2 years has drawn this family closer, not apart. Shared fear often does that. It strips away the small things and leaves only what matters. Settle, finally, on what endures from all of this, because beneath the diagnoses and the dates there is something simpler and more lasting. What endures for me is the dignity. 2 people who could have hidden or complained or traded on the world's sympathy, and who chose instead to face their illness with privacy, grace, and a quiet determination to help others. They kept the medical details to themselves, as is their absolute right, and they gave the rest of us only what might do some good. A message about screening, a word about the slow work of recovery, an honest admission that healing takes time. In an age that so often rewards oversharing, there is something almost old-fashioned and deeply admirable in that restraint. What also endures is the reminder, delivered from the most unlikely quarter, that none of us is beyond the reach of this. A king and a future queen, with every resource in the world, still found themselves sitting where so many of you have sat, waiting for results, enduring treatment, learning to live a new normal. If their story carries one practical gift, it is surely the one Charles himself pressed upon us. Do not put off the check. Do not assume it will not be you. Early diagnosis, as he said, quite simply saves lives. There is a quiet generosity in the way both of them handled their platform when you stop to consider it. They did not owe us anything. They could have said nothing at all, and no one could reasonably have complained. Privacy in matters of health is everyone's right, theirs included, and yet, having earned the right to silence, they each chose to share just enough to be useful. A king urging a nation toward its screenings. A princess sitting with frightened families and telling them, with the authority of lived experience, that what they feel is normal and that they are not alone. They turned their own hardest days into a small public good. That instinct, to make meaning out of suffering rather than merely enduring it, is perhaps the most admirable thread running through this entire story. And what I will not do, even now, is pretend to know how either story ends. The future is not ours to read, and it would be a disservice to these two to try. What we can say is gentler and truer. That as things stand, the princess speaks from remission, and the king speaks of treatment eased and progress made. Both are walking forward. Both are doing so with a courage that has, quietly, set an example for a watching country. For today, that is the whole of the good news, and it is plenty. So there they are. Two journeys, run side by side, through the hardest of years. A king easing gently toward better days. A princess turning her own recovery into comfort for others. And a family bound tighter by a fear they have faced together and largely overcome. Thank you, from the heart, for sitting with me through a softer subject than usual. I know it is not the loud, dramatic fare some channels chase, but I have always believed there is a place for stories told kindly, and your presence here tells me you believe it too. If you feel moved to, I would love for you to share a gentle word below. Perhaps this story touched on something in your own life, or your own family. If it did, you are among friends here, and your reflections are always welcome. And if it nudges even one of you to book a screening you have been putting off, then it will have done more good than any episode I could make. Looking to the days just ahead, there is a brighter royal moment almost upon us. This very weekend, on the 13th of June, London marks Trooping the Colour, the King's official birthday parade. All eyes will be on how Charles travels, and on the family gathered around him, and I will be there to walk you gently through every bit of it. So do keep an eye out for that one. Until then, take good care of yourself and of the people you love. This has been Richard Valentin. I am Richard, and I will see you in the next one.